Blog Talk Radio.
Carol the Coach. Sex, love, and relationships. We talk about it here.
Carol the Coach. Compassion with contemporary relevance.
I am a psychotherapist. I can be your personal life coach, and I can help you with your issues. There are no problems too small or too big. You can talk about anything.
Speaker, columnist, radio TV host, and commentator. Carol the Coach brings messages of wellness and empowerment within reach of everyday people every day.
Almost 5 years ago, I lost my soulmate in an accident. He was killed in a plane crash. Life just, for me, has seemed to stop.
There are groups all over the city. I teach one. It is a specific way to start thinking so that you shift how you see the world, which then shifts your energy, and then you feel better and you actually see things differently.
Carol the Coach. Always available too at carolthecoach.com.
Now I've got Russell on the line.
I'm 47 years old. I'm a truck driver. I'm married. I have a wife in San Francisco.
Okay.
I haven't been home in 6 months. My thing is, I don't know if I have a sex addiction or what the problem is. Why do I want what I can't have? And as soon as I can have it, I don't want it anymore.
You're right on target when you say, I don't know if I have a sexual addiction. Well, guess what? Yes, you do. And you know what? That's my specialty, Russell. So you're at the right place. Continue.
I meet women online, and I'm in a different part of the country. I travel all 48 states, so I love sex.
I hear self-esteem issues. You never felt good enough, and you didn't feel like you were getting what you should have then, and you're reenacting that now. Do you want to change that about yourself?
You get what you need.
Well, good evening. Hey, I'm Carol the Coach, and I've had a few internet difficulties tonight, so I'm calling you from my cell phone. I hope it is clear and very available to you. I don't often have these internet difficulties, but when I do, I got to think on my feet, ran down, got the cell phone, because I've got a landline here in the studio, and I'm not quite sure what's going on. Something about an issue with Skype, but I don't use Skype. So, hey, we are flexible. That's what life is all about, is making the proper adjustments the way you should. And, you know, I am excited to be bringing you a special guest tonight. He is a certified sexual addiction therapist, and he's in training with me to become a certified trauma specialist for partners. And I'd actually booked him prior to knowing that he was part of my organization. We're in training together. So Bill Herring is going to be speaking on the importance of honesty for people who are trying to heal in regard to their sexual behavior. You may say to yourself, well, that's kind of a no-brainer, isn't it, Carol? But true honesty is very, very difficult. And the reason it's difficult is because addicts have been lying forever and ever and ever. It can be very difficult, to be honest. Let me just give an example. I was talking with a man tonight who I can marijuana on his body playing guitar. I do believe that in an addiction program, you're supposed to remain abstinent from anything that right. He says I was singing and jamming and my voice was raspy, and you know what? I only had one hit of marijuana. I just wanted to taste it. So she asked him, did you smoke some marijuana? He says no, because in his mind, he had rationalized and justified that he had not smoked. He had merely tasted. And as a result, she caught him lying because, of course, if you taste it, that means you smoked it. And there was an instance where she didn't feel safe. Why? Because he had not been 100% honest. And you know, addicts oftentimes lie by omission. And when they lie by omission, they're not being honest. You know, I was talking to another man who went to a program with his son, a 12-step meeting with his son, and the meeting started out, hi, I'm a sex addict, and I am always working on my honesty. And this man, the father, who was a sex addict, who was at his son's meeting, who was a sex addict, but I was so impressed because I realized, yes, the issue is sexual addiction, but more than that, it's about lying. So, tonight we're going to be talking about rigorous honesty. We're going to be talking about how do you increase integrity. We're going to be talking about why Bill doesn't refer much to sex addiction anymore. And I'm looking forward to meeting with him. He's got a lot to say about that all-encompassing honesty. Now, last week I talked to you about a woman named Sandy, and she had felt very, very betrayed by her husband. After lots and lots of work together, she decided that they needed to separate, and after they separated and she was working on herself, she also decided to date. You know, it was as if she was so hurt, and dating was a reaction to being hurt. And I said last week, Sandy, you definitely cannot date. You haven't closed a chapter, so why open another one? And we didn't quite get through the email, and so I promised Sandy that I would talk again about her situation. You know, she had said, my husband maintains that he's told me everything, but he has said that many times in our past, so I don't believe him. I recently asked again about affair partners being in our home and our bed. He denied it and denied it and denied it, and then he answered truthfully. Enough that I know women have been in both of our homes, and he's engaged in sexual activity in our bed. The same bed I sleep in every night, the same bed in which I conceived 5 children. I slept on the couch until I could purchase a new mattress. And if you remember last week, I said, boy, that's not unusual to purchase objects to get a fresh start. Well, she continues, he's not willing to admit that he's holding back details of what he did. He says that because I'm pushing the issue. You know, here's a partner, and so many of them do. They want the truth. They want all of the truth. Now, as a therapist and as a partner in training and close to getting my certification, I know that knowing all the details is not necessarily helpful. But they need to know the extent of the details. She says, he claims he has continued to lie and omit to protect me and control the triggers I may have. I feel he's being deceitful and obstructing my ability to heal. I cannot tell you how many partners want to know the truth and how many addicts fear hurting their wives further. And so they are not honest. They lie by omission. Well, the bottom line is we all know that they also lie because they don't want any more punishment. You see, it's very easy for an addict in recovery to want to believe if I just get healthy, I shouldn't have to tell her anything more. Well, now you already know Sandy feels he's being deceitful, and she says, triggers results, they are mine to process. I feel he is still controlling the process and is keeping the most deal-breaking details from surfacing to protect himself and his addiction. He may be physically sober since August of 2015, but he relates to me in very much an emotionally dry-drunk manner. He claims the details do not change the number of partners or ways of acting out, that they are just details. I feel quite differently. as these are also things he has included in his first step and shared with his group. Now, I do not believe I'm entitled to his first step, but I am entitled to knowing the full spectrum and details of his acting out. So basically, she says, what do you think, Carol? His therapist is facilitating a disclosure tomorrow. Which questions should I ask? I feel it's in my best interest to let my husband come clean before I ask more my questions. Well, Sandy, when I do a disclosure, here's what I do. If I'm working with both of you, I work with the addict. We go through the entire story. We put in details, but not all the details. You don't need to know the gory details, the things that will traumatize you further. And yet, if there are questions you want to know, I have you write those out so that I can make sure that he addresses those to the best of his ability. And then he knows what those questions are. He answers those to the best of his ability. And then you go through the disclosure process, which takes 2 to 3 hours max, followed by a polygraph test to ensure that what he's told you is true. That's how we do disclosure. So next week I'll talk more about those because disclosures are all about honesty. Usually you've experienced the discovery, and now you want to know, do you know everything? You have every right, Sandy, to know that. But we really believe in this business that a formalized process that keeps you both safe is imperative in delivering those details. All right, now I've got a specialist, Bill Herring, on the line, and he has written an article on honesty that I was very impressed with. And so I asked him to come on the show to talk more about that because, let's face it, you heard me say before, honesty is at the core of true sexual addiction recovery. So, Bill, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Carol. I'm delighted to be here.
Yes, I really, really enjoyed your article, and I thought maybe you could elaborate a little bit about your premise for honesty, you know, how you see it as being helpful in couples therapy. You know, you're a CSAT, a certified sexual addiction therapist. But I understand that you don't use the phrase sex addiction as much as you used to. Why is that?
Well, thank you. That's right. And, of course, I do still use and believe and practice the strategies and the techniques and the principles of good, solid sex addiction treatment. But as the years have gone by, what I more and more came to realize is that the resources that I bring and that we as a profession bring to people who are struggling with sex addiction are not of benefit just to people with sex addiction, but to so many other people who are engaging in chronic sexual deception who may not actually meet full criteria for sex addiction, but who cause really the same amount of damage in their lives and in the lives of people that obviously that they care about and who care about them. And I noticed that so many of the books that I use and recommend, and so many of so much of the language that is used specifically references sex addiction. And I started to realize, what about all of the people who are engaging in behaviors that are absolute violations of their integrity, that are violations of their commitment in their relationships, and are violations of their own value system, who have done that over and over again, may not, though, actually benefit from the phrase sex addiction, but would benefit from the recovery, the theories, the strategies that we all use to help people live in greater integrity. I thought, wait a minute, what about them? So I started finding myself using less labels of all types and more descriptions, even though it takes longer to say. You know, it's quick to say sex addict. It's a little longer to say, here's a person who has gone through their life and who has broken their promises throughout their life to themselves and to others, who feels intense shame, who feels unable to do anything about that, and who lives in a state of isolation and removed from true intimacy with another human being. it's much easier and quicker to say sex addict, but in some ways it's more opening to a wider degree of people to look at what is the actual behavior and what is the problem that a person is exhibiting in their language. Because I found myself, and I'm sure you do the same thing, spending a fair amount of time negotiating and convincing and giving tests and giving readings and so on to have a person be able to own a label when I would much rather help that person engage in their vision of health, their vision of relational health, their vision of sexual health, their vision of mental health, their vision of spiritual health. And when I, as I'm sure it's the same with you and so many of our colleagues, start to address with my clients who come to see me for help, start addressing that language, people really start to open up to that and nod their head and say, yes, that's what I want. Whereas if I say, well, let's talk about sex addiction, they have to work on that pretty carefully because I can immediately kick up some resistance against that. And I find that to stay away from the label and to go into these descriptions and into this vision of how do you want your life to look brings people much more gently into them having that discussion with themselves, to start to look at the question in the mirror, why am I acting the way that I'm acting? What is this about me? In what way am I broken? Because I will be glad to say to a person who comes to me with all of these problems, maybe sex addiction is not the language for you. Now let's look at what the alternatives can be. And they're not very pleasant. Well, the person says, well, I know I'm not a sex addict. Yeah, go ahead. Please, I'm sorry. I'll go on top for a long time.
Well, it sounds like you know a great way of delivering information that you believe our clients will ascribe to. It decreases the defenses, but it still holds them accountable to their behaviors. And that's why, obviously you want to talk about that deception and you want to talk about how do you build trust and what do you do with the dishonesty and how do you shift that to being more honest. And let's face it takes a lot of courage for somebody who's lived a whole host of lies and betrayal and deceit to take the risks to be honest from today forward. I mean,
tremendous.
Really. Now, you've made this your mission. Do you think that most of the people who come to you for help have just been dishonest most of their lives? Or it's kind of developed over time?
It's a great question. I think that people start out with a natural desire to be honest. Honesty, if you think about what is honesty, it's an agreement with reality. It says, this is what is. This is what the world is, and this is my place in it. This is what I feel. This is what I know. This is what I need. This is what I want. And that level of transparency is what really every person wants when they're coming into life. So I think very few people start off dishonest from the get-go. But as you know, that there are, unfortunately, many people who learn from an early age that it's just simply not safe to be honest. They may fear the reaction from a parent who maybe for whatever reason could not provide a haven of safety for them to really develop an ability to live in their authentic self. That they may learn that they need to act a certain way to get a certain response from a caregiver. And so in learning how to survive and learning how to live and learning how to be in a relationship, they unfortunately have to learn this is not safe for me to be. This is too fearful to be. This has too much shame to be. And I don't think a child doesn't think those thoughts. I am having fear right now. They just live in that, and because of it, have to make a judgment unconsciously. Do I live in fear, or do I shut down a part of me that actually is capable of living in truth? And of course, it's tragic when people come into their adult lives and they've never had a real felt ability to be close and intimate with another person, because nobody's going to broadcast that. A young adult is not going to come into a relationship and say, by the way, I don't know how to be intimate in a relationship. So people fake it. And it's in that faking it that I think sets the seeds from the very beginning of adult relationships, where a person's life and a person's appearance of life starts to veer away from each other. And that's especially the case when we're talking about sexual issues.
Absolutely. And so you believe that when there are reasons for them to have lied and not to have been honest, legitimate reasons, usually ones that have to do with safety, they kind of develop this construct whereby when they do things that are going to get them in trouble, that are going to get them criticized, that they lie further. And so they really kind of get away from living their truth. And it's in truth that you really understand yourself and obviously build trust with your partner. So can you tell us the effects of chronic sexual deception on oneself, the addict, as well as their partners?
Well, as you know, the effect on a person who came into a relationship with another person that they chose to love and to trust and to rely upon, to learn at some point that trust has been misplaced, that they've actually been with a person who has kept a vital part of themselves away from their partner, it's just devastating. And more so, not to compare pain, it's bad enough when someone finds out that their partner maybe has lied in business or lied to a family member or some non-sexual issue that doesn't really reflect upon the intimacy, the core intimacy of a monogamous relationship. And it's bad enough when it happens one time. But with people who have acted out of integrity time and time again and have built up such well-developed to maintain that lie, when that all comes crashing down, I mean, the impact upon a partner, it's the equivalent of oftentimes of any sort of traumatic event that you could imagine. That it's not just that the relationship with their deceiving partner has suffered, but so often it's their relationship with themselves that suffers, because the feeling becomes, how could I have been so deceived? How could I have let myself love and be so vulnerable to this person who has hurt me so badly? What is, not just what is wrong with this person, but how did I not know this? And the impact upon self-esteem and just the ability to then trust anything becomes, it's almost impossible. And finally, I think it even beyond the difficulty of trusting the other person, the difficulty of trusting self, is that at the fundamental level, to be exposed to that much deception in the life of a person who did not know that so much sexual secret keeping was going on damages their trust with reality itself. That now everything that I thought I knew to question. It would almost be like being told that 2 + 2 no longer equals 4, and that you were convinced that it did all of your life, but you know it doesn't. Once you can't trust that 2 + 2 equals 4, what in the world can you trust? And once you've learned that your intimate relationship has been shattered to that extent, the ability to then trust anything can become so overwhelming that I think that it is why the experience of PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, is not uncommon in partners who have been so just viciously and terribly wounded. And of course, as you know, the healing from that is not quick, it's not easy, and it requires a lot of time and a lot of dedicated effort, ideally on the part of the betraying partner, that the work that the betrayer has to do to rebuild that trust is so much more than just not lying anymore. It's so much more than just stopping the bad behavior. A whole new way of relating often needs to be built out of the fragmented ashes of what was there before, and that's daunting work for anybody.
Oh, 100%. So what's it take for a person who has lied so very often to begin to live in greater truth?
Well, that's the million-dollar question. How do you let me think of different ways to say this. I think fundamentally the way not to lie to somebody else is not to lie to self. I mean, it has to start with that. And so many of the people that I work with oftentimes don't even realize when they're starting to lie. I have had people tell me, I found myself lying when it served me no good purpose. The truth would have been just as easy, or not easier, but I find myself almost instinctively saying something that's not quite true. So I take two tracks with that. One is, let's explore why that is. Why does that come so naturally? And I think for some people there's different reasons for that. Now, I want to take the rose-colored glasses off, and it's another reason that I don't always use the phrase sex addict when looking at this kind of long-standing deception. The reality is that some people just don't have much appreciation for the difference between truth and falsehood, between right and wrong. There truly are people who are pathological in that social agreement, which is that truth is better than falsehood. And I say pathological in its social agreement because if you turn that around, that would be sociopathic. That this is not psychopathic. This is not somebody who delights in the misery of someone else, but someone who has a very, let's say, loose moral compass and who just does not have a tremendous motivation to live in truth. And there are studies show about 4% of the population probably meets the diagnosis for antisocial personality, or a person who really is sociopathic. And so for a person like that, I used to think that even that person does not have an ability, there's no hope. That person does not have an ability to heal. But what I have come to learn is that it's like a little spark can turn into a flame. And if there is even one little piece of conscience, if there's one little piece of distaste at the fact that you can live and lie so easily, if there's just a bit of that moral direction, that can be built upon, that can be like the little spark can be fueled and fanned and turned into a totally rehabilitated self that's filled with integrity, filled with honesty, filled with, and it's almost an unused word these days, but let's say moral character. But what it takes at the beginning is a sense of brokenness, that sense that a person's ego is so shattered that they say, something is wrong with me and I don't know what to do about it. Now, that's what brings a lot of people into 12-step programs, and I'm a huge believer in 12-step recovery. Even if a person ultimately says, I don't think that I'm a addict. I think I'm a jerk. And that's one thing I'll say to somebody. If you're not an addict, you got to look at some other words, and maybe just kind of jerk is a nice way of saying it. What I love so much about 12-step recovery, even for somebody who ultimately would not call themselves an addict, is that it models honesty, integrity, ego deflation. That's not the same as shaming, but the courage of being vulnerable enough to say, I'm broken and I don't know what to do about it. And as you know, and I'll stop with this, and I know you have more questions, that the heart of 12-step recovery is not so much about stopping the behavior. It's getting to the underlying character defects that are underneath that behavior. It's looking at the dishonesty, the self-seeking, the selfishness, the narcissism, what's known in 12-step language as character defects. And the process of going through, not just attending meetings, and I tell this to my clients, that you can go to all the meetings you want, and that's helpful for a 12-step fellowship. But if you want to work a 12-step program and get these real deep changes in your character, you have to go all the way, which means you have to work all of the steps. It's not a one-step program. It's not a 5-step program. It's a 12-step program. And people who are going to work that.
Well,
Yeah, go ahead.
I really agree with that, as well as, what it takes for a person who has lied so often is to feel like they have an environment where they can be honest and where they're not going to be judged and where they're going to be held accountable, but they're going to get to work through those character defects and shift them around. And definitely that 12-step program provides all that support. And that's why people that go, oh, I don't want to do 12-step, or oh, I don't necessarily believe in a higher power, I say, do you want to work on yourself in a safe environment and go through the steps so that eventually you're giving back to others and helping them? And, of course, everybody, most people, unless you're, like you said, they're sociopaths,
thank you.
They do want that,
They just don't necessarily want to do the work. The old joke that everybody wants to get to heaven, but nobody wants to die. It's we want to get to that level of better living, but going through what it takes to get there, it's just about the bravest thing that a person can do. And I have tremendous admiration for people who are willing to do it, as much as having just tremendous amount of empathy for what it's like for a partner, a person who's been betrayed, to have to be a part of that transitional process where the person who has been so deceptive is working to grow into this different person. But what does the partner do, during that period of time? Go to the movies? No way. You have to. You're living right in the middle of this fear and this, this sense of who is this person and how do we live together in a way that I can trust. Which is why I think it's so important. It's not always capable. It's so important for both people to have a therapist who can help them, and to have couples therapy that can work with the healing process for the couple as a whole, and to be able to have, I think so often, a rigorous process of disclosure and formal. Let's put all the cards on the table, and get all of those secrets out into the open. Because I truly believe, and I'm not the first person to say it by any means, that you're only as sick as your secrets.
Yes, I would agree with that. For our listening audience, I am talking with Bill Herring, who's a licensed clinical social worker and a certified sex addiction therapist in Atlanta, Georgia. And he's been in private practice for over 25 years. He's worked with individuals, couples, and groups. And the wonderful thing about Bill is not only does he work with you face-to-face, but he also will work with you online and by telephone. His website is Bill Herring, and that's BILLHERRING.com. And his email address is bill@billherring.com. It does not get much simpler than that. And, Bill, you obviously have specialized in helping people who engage in chronic sexual deception, as well as the people who have been hurt by them. So I've got another question for you, and I kind of like a bullet point answer.
Okay.
So now I'm gonna make this tougher. I want to know what you believe are the 3 greatest impediments to sexual honesty. If you had to bullet point them, what would you say are the 3 greatest impediments?
Okay. How about this? Fear and shame. Period. That good enough of a bullet point for you?
That was
I'm
wonderful.
kidding because it really is the case. I mean, fear is the fear of a catastrophic loss as a result of honesty. Generally, the fear that the relationship is going to end. And why wouldn't it? It would not be less than what a person would deserve. And of course, shame is the fear is the relationship with the other person. Could that change? And shame is so much more. It's the relationship with self. And to be able to look at self and say, who am I? What have I done? What does this mean about me? And what can I do about it? confronts shame head on. So those are that's my elevator statement back to you about the greatest impediments to sexual honesty: fear and shame, and neither of those are dealt with very easily by themselves. This is why you need the help of other people to get through those. That I'll call them the twin-headed monster.
100%. Now, you told me that if you had only 2 words to tell a person with a sexual self-control problem, it would be "don't lie." Now, why do you consider this to be the most important message to tell somebody with this issue?
It's the hallmark. It's the ground floor that everything else is built upon. I'm thinking in my approach and in my practice, Carol. If a person makes a decision, don't lie, and I mean about anything. Don't lie. That means cash register honesty. That means don't tell a small white lie. That means don't say something and then realize later that it wasn't true and not go back and own that and admit it. If a person doesn't lie about the smallest things, they won't lie about the biggest things. And the second point is that so often what the person winds up being honest about is what needs to be said. I have seen people who have just gone through years of deception, and it turns out that what they were not willing to talk about was some sexual interest or desire that they had, and they were too ashamed to talk about it. So they just weren't honest about it. They didn't talk about it. Or back to the fear and the shame. They were afraid that if they told the truth, that the truth would either damage them or would damage another person, a person that they care about. So I really try to challenge people that I work with who have been involved in so much deception to make the commitment to just simply, I say simply, it's not, what they say, simple is not easy. Don't lie. Stay in truth at all costs. If you do that, it may be the most difficult thing you've ever done, but your life will transform. Your absolute life will transform. Now, of course, honesty and openness are two different questions. We probably could talk about the difference between honesty doesn't mean that you run around telling everybody everything. There is room for discretion. But in your primary partnership, this is why it's so important for there to be agreements of what will be talked about, what sort of details will be brought up, so that a person doesn't fall into this, the dishonesty by omission. They didn't say a lie, but they just didn't say something they needed to, and so by not talking about it, it was in effect a deception as well. So that's it. When I have a person and I will say, I may see you one meeting, I may never see you again. Let me tell you 2 words that can change your life if you can do it, and it's not for the faint of heart. Don't lie. If you say you went to Burger King and you went to McDonald's, go back and say you went to McDonald's instead. It's how you do the smallest thing is how you do the largest thing. How's that?
Well, that makes total sense, and that's an easy formula. Not so easy to implement because one's going to catch themselves sometimes after the fact, after they've lied, and then you're really recommending go back and set people straight. Let them know that you were not totally honest.
Especially in a primary partnership, and because, again, nobody is perfect. And if you make a mistake, oftentimes I help couples to come up with some time frame in which that deception will come back and be revealed. Somebody, and I'm not talking just about a sexual deception, but somebody who says, hey, earlier today I said this. It really wasn't exactly right. What the deeper truth is, and then fill in whatever that is. You can do that within a day. You do that within an hour. That's okay. You're giving yourself time to realize that you deviated away from honesty. But if you go, a day can turn into a week turns into a month turns into a year, and then the heat's off, and you just don't ever say what it was that you were being dishonest about, and it rests there like a tumor, that could grow again in the future. So,
Yeah,
honesty,
very.
Yeah, thank you.
Go ahead.
I'm just thinking the old phrase that honesty is the best policy. Like you say, it's easy to say, it's hard to do, but it all starts with self-awareness and not lying to self. And again, it's another reason that I value people having a trusting relationship with a therapist in which they can say anything. And that's one reason I think it's generally best for a person who's struggling with honesty to have an individual therapist who's different than their couples therapist, because they might need to tell that individual therapist something that they're not yet ready to tell their partner, or maybe they choose to never do. I can't force a client to be honest. I can only encourage. But if I know a secret that the client has told me, and I'm also working with the client's partner, I'm working with the couple, that's a position I don't want to put myself in, of feeling like that I'm having to weigh my relationship with the client with my relationship with the partnership. So it's one reason that I prefer, when possible, to just work with one person and not working with with two or three within the system. I don't know how you work with that. I know different colleagues work different ways, but I just found that to be, in general, the best practice for myself.
Well, absolutely. I have to tell you, I'm the only certified sexual addiction therapist in Indianapolis, and in addition to that, I am the only trained APSAT in Indianapolis, and of course I'm going for my certification. So what I like to do is get people started and then refer them on when I believe that they're ready. And I encourage any clinicians who are listening to think about an incredible practice where you really make a difference and you'll have more than enough clients, because, Bill, you know that this is an epidemic. Both being an addict and being the partner of an addict is truly traumatizing, and there's a lot of support that's needed. Now, if I could, I want to shift you real quick, because you brought up the coupleship. And, people who have been sexually deceived by their partners obviously want to know the truth. Do you think there are things that they don't need to know, that the partner does not need to know?
Sure. Great question, and a tricky question. I'm of a couple of different minds. Philosophically, I think that a person who has been deceived has a right to ask for anything that they want to know. They really ask for what you want to feel whole again. That's different, though, from the question of what to know and then how to know it. I see, unfortunately, and it makes sense why it would happen, that someone, especially early on in the healing process, they have so many questions, they want to know so many things, that oftentimes the discussions that start to happen about what happened with who, when, where, they happen in a very uncontrolled setting, maybe late at night, maybe when one or both people are tired or upset, or in a lot of different ways, the least able to have some of the most important conversations that they can have, which is why I think it's helpful to slow the process down, ask for what you need to have to from your betrayer to heal in a structured way. I think that's best done in a therapist's office. It can be best done in formal disclosure. And although, again, I'd like to say that you get the right to ask for anything that you want, I hesitate at times when people want to know extremely graphic details. And it's understandable how somebody may want to know down to the most granular level what their betrayer did. But those images can't be unimaged. Once you have certain thoughts or certain images in your head, you can't unthink that anymore. And I think that at times a sufficient level of behavior to understand what happened by categories is sufficient without needing to know, the absolute depth of detail. My other concern is at times when a person who has been betrayed sexually by their partner, they want to know everything that goes on in that person's mind, and they want to know who have you fantasized about, who have you thought about in a sexual way, and who have you entertained thoughts that that you're embarrassed to share. I was going to go ahead and say, who have you masturbated to? And I have concern about that because a person's mind, a person's thoughts, a person's fantasies, and I'm going to say this, especially men, can run the gamut of fantasy life. And when the sex addict's fantasies are being dissected, it can go to a lot of places that don't include where their behavior would ever go. And I know there's some controversy about how appropriate is it for a person who is a sex addict to engage in sex with self or masturbation. I mean, personally, I have known clients who have been able to they just don't have a problem with masturbation. Certainly, porn addicts, I think if they're going to masturbate, do not need to be doing that with visual imagery. That pornographic imagery, I think, can be very, 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 very risky. But to have thoughts that are fantasy-based and for a partner to want to know the full details of what those fantasies are, at times I'm afraid that that's going to open up a Pandora's box of fear, because the addict who wants to be very honest will share in honest detail, and it may be material that they would never do. But, we don't get to choose our fantasies. We can control them, but we can't choose them. So I know different people have different feelings about that, but that's where I stand here in 2016.
Well, that makes sense. And then what are your thoughts about the use of a polygraph as a tool to assist in honesty?
I think it's a great question. I have experienced many times that the structured therapeutic use of polygraph is a great tool. That even if a person is wanting to be honest in a disclosure or just in general, they're wanting to remain honest, you can have all of the accountability software, you can have all of the monitoring, you can have everything in place, but there's no way to really know, definitively know, has the truth been revealed. And I think after a disclosure, oftentimes partners will want a structured polygraph, literally down to just one question. And the question just is, did you knowingly withhold any information in the disclosure that was relevant to the, to the healing of your relationship? It could be asked a little bit better than that. It has to be behavioral. Did you knowingly withhold any information that your partner wanted you to say? And it comes down to a yes or no. I've unfortunately seen people who want or expect that a polygraph is going to be something that they can ask 100 questions. Well, did you do this? Did you do that? And most polygraph examiners are going to hold that back and say, at the most, 3 or 4 questions is about all that is going to be appropriate in a polygraph test. But there have been times in which, and Carol, you may know this, that there's what are known as parking lot confessions, when a person goes through a disclosure and they're going to go have the polygraph, and they're right there going into the door. It's like, I need to tell you one more thing. And that may have never come out if that moment didn't happen. And rather than that being something to punish the person for, I think the goal of polygraph is to continue to encourage revelation of truth. And if a person is able to bring that out, then I think the polygraph is a very useful tool. It's not a legal tool, and I think it needs to be understood that the results are not to be used for legal proceedings. This is not something to catch a person being dishonest, but to help a person be honest. And this is why I never use the word lie detector. I really dislike, and I tend to correct people when they say, oh, I want a lie detector test. I say, well, if you get on a scale, you're trying to lose weight, you're not going to get on a scale. You don't call that a fat detector. No, I would rather call it a truth detector. It is really to help clients heal together and to really comfort each other. I've seen couples come together and hug after the end of a successful polygraph, after a disclosure, and it's a healing, beautiful, almost spiritual moment when they feel like what we have right now is truth. We have truth. We may not have anything else, but we have that. And my goodness, what's greater?
Oh, I 100% agree. And, of course, there are a lot of people that don't believe that polygraph tests are accurate. We happen to have an investigator here in Indianapolis that has never failed me. He asks no more than 5 questions. He understands the addict, and he understands what the partner wants, and he meets with both of them and really goes through the questions, makes sure they're doable and answerable. And if there is any deviation, he and the partner will work together to figure out a better way to ask something. And so it's not necessarily, okay, let's ask these 4 or 5 questions, but there may be something about a date that a partner asks that is so triggering to the addict that it has to be asked in a different way.
Thank you for that.
You know, once in a while we'll get a partner that doesn't, that thinks not only have I been hoodwinked, so has the investigator, and that's okay too. You know, I understand that it's really hard to believe the truth, and nothing's invaluable. So I recommend polygraph tests after disclosures and from time to time throughout the year to build trust.
I've worked with several couples in which the use of a recurrent polygraph, maybe even once a year. One couple, ironically, they do it every Valentine's Day, and they've gotten to the point where they can, ironically, almost laugh about it. Just the irony that's the Valentine's gift, and in some ways, it's almost like a drug test for someone who maybe they might smoke a joint, at a party or something. But if they know they're going to be drug tested, it can help them to say, no, I'm not going to do that. And maybe if a person was right on the borderline, they may or may not try to wind up being at risk of doing something that they would regret. The knowing that there's going to be a polygraph can shore up those defenses to say, I don't need to do that. So I think it helps the person who's struggled with dishonesty as well as the person who's been the victim of so much dishonest behavior. And like you, I have a person who I trust. I went through about 3 or 4 polygraph examiners before I landed on a person who I think does a beautiful job at understanding that relationship healing polygraph is very different than forensic and legal polygraph. And the person I use wants couples to heal. So he will ask the question in several different ways if, like you say, if there's some kind of problem that's happening, in order to realize, how does this question need to be worded? What's tripping up this false positive, if indeed it is a false positive, in order to help the couple to know that the answer that they got really was the truth. So, like you, I'm obviously would sound like you and I are in agreement about the careful use of polygraph in certain instances.
Let me ask you, obviously we have listeners all over the world, and if they do want to get with you and discuss how to improve their ability to be honest, how to take that risk and what they need to do to actually work through that, can they do that online and by telephone?
I think I'd like to say yes, that anything is better than nothing. What I prefer to do, if I'm working with someone who wants to consult with me by phone or online, is that I would like to help them where they are, to help gather up a full understanding of what their needs are, and then help to look at how can the most of that be done where they are. Is there a good therapist that is close to them? They're not a CSAT, knows what they're doing. There's therapists here in Atlanta who I refer to regularly who are not specifically CSAT trained, but I trust implicitly in their work. So I have facilitated disclosures by distance. I think it's certainly better than not having that happen. This can be such crucial and vulnerable work that I would, as I'm sure you would too, would much rather be there in person with the people that I'm working with. But if it's between that and nothing, absolutely. I will work with them by phone. I will work with them online with a clear understanding of how that is different from the individual in-person work. And again, any guidance toward the right direction, I think, is helpful. So
it
I'm
sounds
always
like what
willing
you're saying, too, is that you'll be a consultant on some level and see if you can access for them the best services possible. And if there aren't any available, you're happy to help.
Do what I can. You said that so well.
Absolutely.
You've done a lot of these interviews.
Well,
I've just done one.
Well, I'm talking with Bill Herring, and that's BILL, capital HERRING. You can reach him at billherring.com. His email address is bill@billherring.com. And Bill, this is such an important issue. I don't know if you got to hear the very beginning of the show, but I have a sex addict who's a dad, and he and his grown son went to their first meeting together in his son's state. He's from Indianapolis, but his son was in another state. And when they went to the 12-step program, they said, hi, I'm a sex addict, and I'm a compulsive liar, and I want to work on my lying first and foremost. And my client was so impressed with the fact that he felt like that got to the heart of the matter. And that when you really start... Yeah, when you start working on the honesty, other things fall into place. Now you need the tools.
That's right.
Exactly.
That's right. I love that story. Thank you.
You're welcome. I so appreciate your article. And can people get a hold of that article that you wrote
Absolutely.
on honesty?
At billherring.com, I have a section of articles that I've written, as well as blog posts, which are little shorter observations, and I believe that's under one of my blogs from earlier this year, and I've written about a whole host of topics related to this type of recovery work and healing and growth from just this thing called life that we're all trying to manage and do the best that we can. And so I would welcome anybody to come and take a look over at some of what I've written, and if I can be of help via email or telephone, I'm available for that.
Well, thank you so much, and I wish you the best, and I encourage and applaud the work you're doing.
As I do you. It's been a pleasure, Carol.
Thanks, Bill. Have a great week.
Okay. Thanks, Nell. Bye.
Bye-bye. All right, that was Bill Herring, and as you can see, he really believes in honesty, and that's what it's all about, and that's so important. Hey, listen, we're at the end of our show. We're going to be talking about mindfulness next week with Darren Ford, but until then, you know I feel very blessed to be with you every week, helping you with sex addiction and partner trauma. And as I say at the end of every show, you know, there'll only be one of you at all times, so I fearlessly want you to have the courage to be yourself. And I want to thank you again for being a part of this show. We'll talk to you next week at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Have a good one.